The rain against the penthouse glass was a muffled drumbeat, a rhythm for Port Oriole's restless Atlantic heart. Below, the lights of the Briar Harbor estate blurred into the wet dark. Adrian Moretti, 38 years old and the quiet sovereign of the Moretti family, moved with a stillness that belied the city's chaos. He pulled the cashmere blanket up to his daughter's chin. Mina, 8 years old and the only true north in his compromised world, was already deep in sleep, her breathing soft in the opulent room. He allowed himself one beat, two, just to watch her, here, in this attic sanctuary. He was only a father. Then, behind him, a sound that did not belong. It was not the rain, not the old house settling, not the distant foghorn from the sound. It was sharp, dry, and absolute. A metallic click, the unmistakable sound of a gun being cocked. Adrian froze. His hand was still resting on the edge of Mina's blanket. His gaze lifted, not to turn, but to the sprawling window panes dark with the night storm. He could see the room reflected in the glass, the warm lamplight, the edge of his daughter's bed, and behind his own shoulder, a shadow, a silhouette holding the weapon, its form distorted by the rivulets of water streaming down the pane. The moment stretched, impossibly tight. 36 hours earlier, the city had been holding its breath for a different reason. The Blue Lark, a neutral territory restaurant of gleaming brass and dark wood, had become a stage, a rival leader, choking. His face a mask of purple terror, had collapsed during a supposed peace dinner, a faked heart attack, a theatrical medical disaster designed to ignite a war. But Adrian Moretti had not built his empire on predictable violence. As panic erupted, Adrian had moved through the chaos. He hadn't drawn a weapon, he'd knelt, performed chest compressions with brutal, efficient force, and saved the man's life in full view of the city's underworld and civilian elite. It was a power play, a public declaration that he, not chaos, controlled the streets. That act of public mercy had an unintended witness, Dr. Elise Hart, a cardiologist volunteering her time at Flamingo Hospital, had been routed past the scene. She was the widow of a musician, an innocent man vaporized in a mafia crossfire 1 year prior. Her grief had calcified into a white-hot hatred for the men who treated Port Oriole as their chessboard. But what she saw that night unsettled her. Later, in an alley slick with rain behind the hospital, she'd seen Adrian Moretti again. He wasn't in his tailored suit now. He was kneeling on the wet pavement, his shirt sleeves rolled up, skillfully bandaging the arm of a young, terrified soldier from his own crew. He spoke in a low, calming tone. It was a gesture of care so profound, so contrary to the image of the devil she held in her mind, that it planted a seed of dangerous conflict within her. The city was already tense. Rumors were spreading from the wharves to the high-rises. The Interstate Integrity Bureau, a meticulous and feared federal agency known as the IIB, was tightening its grip. They were sniffing around the port gangs, and everyone knew the IIB never moved until it was ready to sever the head. Elise knew the rumors were true. Her adoptive brother, Jonah Vale, was one of their lead agents. He had called her that same morning, his voice clipped with authority. "Elise, I know your route. Stay away from the Harbor District. Stay away from Moretti. He's not a puzzle for you to solve. He's an anchor, and he'll pull you down to the bottom with him." Adrian, unaware of the doctor who had twice observed him, navigated his own burdens. He checked the time, not on a watch, but on a heavy, silver pocket watch he carried everywhere. It had been his grandfather's. Etched into the casing was a Latin phrase, poenitentia fidele, faithful atonement. It was the theme of his life, a private quest for redemption in a world that only respected sin. Elise finished her shift, the image of Adrian's hands that could save a rival or soothe a follower haunting her. She was exhausted, ready to go home to the empty apartment that still echoed with phantom piano chords. Her phone buzzed, a blocked number. A voice, digitally muffled, spoke quickly. "You want to clean up Port Oriole? Doctor, you want the men who killed your husband to pay. I have the proof. Meet me at the old pier turntable. 10 o'clock. It was a trap. Every instinct screamed it, but the mention of her husband overrode her caution. It was a lure she couldn't refuse. The meeting point was deserted. Just the sound of the churning water below. The contact never showed, but something was left for her, tucked into the decaying mechanism of the turntable. It was a faded photograph, laminated against the damp. Elise's blood ran cold. It was Adrian Moretti, younger, standing on a boat at the harbor. He was holding a swaddled newborn, but it wasn't the baby that made her stop breathing. He was shirtless and clear on his back. Curling over his right shoulder blade was a distinctive scar. It was shaped exactly like a breaking wave. It was the scar she had described to the police for a year, the scar she saw in her nightmares, the scar that belonged to the gunman who had turned and looked right at her before firing the shot that killed her husband. The anonymous tip led her to the Night Canary, a bar tucked into an alley where the neon sign bled red and blue onto the wet cobblestones. A mournful saxophone spilled out every time the door opened, a sound of profound loneliness. This was not her world. Elise Hart clutched her coat, the laminated photograph in her pocket feeling heavy, toxic. She was looking for an informant with proof. Instead, she found Adrian Moretti. He was in a back booth, the shadows half claiming his face as if he were carved from them. He didn't look surprised to see her. He looked inevitable. "You're in the wrong part of town, Dr. Hart," he said, his voice a low rumble beneath the music. "I'm looking for someone." "I know." He slid something across the dark, scarred wood of the table. It was her wallet. He was fast. My man was faster. You were so focused on the trap, you didn't notice the jackal. Elise stared at the wallet, her blood cooling, the meeting, the informant. It was all him. He had eyes everywhere. "You set this up. The call, the picture." "The call? Yes. I needed to speak with you, and I doubted you'd accept a formal invitation." He paused, a flicker of genuine curiosity in his gaze. "The picture, no, but now I'm intrigued." She ignored the opening, sitting rigidly opposite him. The small table lamp cast harsh shadows upward. "You save your rival one day and lure a doctor into an alley bar the next. What game are you playing?" "Survival," he said simply. "You want Port Oriole scrubbed clean? You think your brother in the IIB can do it if I fall? The vacuum won't be filled by saints. Doctor, it will be chaos. It will be bloody. I keep the balance." "The balance," she shot back, her voice tight. "Is that what you call the crossfire that killed my husband?" His expression didn't waver, but the air thickened, the saxophone outside seeming to bend its note. "I try to keep the war cold. I have a daughter. I want her to grow up in a city that isn't burning. That is the only game I play." Elise felt the sharp sting of that a daughter. Mina. "I didn't bring you here to debate philosophy," Adrian continued, leaning slightly into the light. "I need a favor, a professional one. I need you to see a patient. I don't make house calls for the Mafia. Her name is Serafina. She's my adoptive mother. She is unwell. Her physicians are competent, but they are on my payroll. They tell me what I want to hear." His gaze held hers, stripped of pretense. "I need someone who isn't afraid of me to tell me the truth," he added. "She runs the Breyer Scholarship Fund." Elise knew the fund. It was the Moretti family's legitimate face, a charity rumored to wash more money than it ever gave to students. When he spoke of his mother, the hard lines of the dawn softened. She saw the man from the alley again, the one kneeling on the wet pavement, tending to his soldier. It was a crack in the monster's facade, a glimpse of the dutiful son. "Why me? There are other doctors." "Because," Adrian said, "you hate me. You are the only person in this city I can trust to be honest about her condition." Before she could form a refusal, a subtle tension shifted in the room. The bartender stopped polishing a glass. Adrian's gaze lifted, moving past Elise to the rain-streaked window that faced the street. "They're sloppy," he murmured. Elise glanced back, A dark sedan was parked across the street, its occupants little more than shadows, their focus entirely on the bar entrance. Who? The Salvetti family. Their new boss, Rico Salvetti, is young and impatient. He thinks the port is his for the taking. He sees my recent public service as weakness. The moment of vulnerability was gone. The predator was back. "Let me take you home. They won't move if you're with me." "No," she said, too quickly. "I can take myself home." He analyzed her, then gave a single, accepting nod. He reached into his coat, but it wasn't a weapon. He produced a simple, heavy-stock business card. It held only a phone number. "This isn't for me. It's my daughter's direct line. If I'm ever unavailable and Mina needs help, that's the number. Keep it, please." The weight of the card in her hand felt heavy, like an anchor. It was a piece of his soul. As she stood to leave, her pocket buzzed, a text message. It was from Jonah. "IIB is hitting Warehouse 7 tonight, 9 o'clock. Stay away. Elise, I mean it. This isn't a game." Warehouse 7. Elise's mind raced. That was the registered address for the Breyer Scholarship Fund, Serafina. She looked up at Adrian. He was watching her, his expression unreadable. He hadn't just asked her to see his mother. He had known the raid was coming. He was testing her, or using her as a shield. "I'm not worth trusting, Doctor," Adrian said, as if reading her thoughts. His voice was quiet, devoid of self-pity. "I know that. Probably the only person in the world who should trust me is my daughter." Elise left the bar, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She didn't go to her car. She took the long way, cutting through the old brick tunnels that ran under the harbor railway. The air was damp and cold, smelling of salt and rust. She needed to think. She paused, leaning against the damp brick to catch her breath. Her phone's light grazed the wall, illuminating something that wasn't modern graffiti. It was an old symbol, deeply carved, a pulley wheel crossed by 3 stylized ropes, the mark of the Cableway Guild, a smuggling network rumored to be centuries old, a ghost story the harbor masters told. It meant a third player, older than the Mafia, was moving in the shadows. Elise finally emerged onto the street near her apartment, the rain washing the city clean. Across the way, almost invisible in the downpour, Adrian Moretti's town car idled. He hadn't left. He hadn't followed. He had watched, a silent sentinel, ensuring she made it out of his territory. She saw his silhouette through the rain-lashed windshield, a man who could orchestrate chaos and yet stand a quiet vigil, a man who wore the scar of her husband's killer. Elise's heart turned away, pulling her collar tight, and hated herself. She hated him for being the devil, and she hated herself because, for one fleeting, treacherous moment, her heart had faltered for him. The raid on Warehouse 7 was a bust, just as Adrian had intended. Jonah was furious, and Elise used his anger to her advantage. She agreed to meet him at an all-night diner, a neutral ground of formica tables and stale coffee. "He used you, Elise," Jonah said, his hands wrapped around a mug he wasn't drinking. "He wanted the IAB to look foolish, and you walked right into it." "He also gave me this," she said, sliding a medical file across the table. It wasn't the real file, but a copy of Serafina Moretti's recent blood work, which Elise had managed to acquire through a contact at Flamingo Hospital. Forget the warehouse. Look at her labs. Her potassium is erratic, and there are markers consistent with progressive cardiac toxicity. She's not just sick. Jonah, she's being poisoned. That stopped him. Elise leaned in. "Adrian asked me to look at her. He suspects. He just doesn't know where to look." She had spent the last 12 hours buried in medical charts. Serafina's condition wasn't a sudden decline. It was a carefully managed descent, slow-acting, designed to mimic natural heart failure. The primary medication she was on, a rare beta blocker, was the perfect vehicle. Elise traced its prescription. The lots were being filled exclusively by Marrow and Sons Pharmacy, a high-end apothecary that catered to the city's elite. A quick search showed the pharmacy's parent company was a holding corporation, the Halcyon Wharf Trust. She fed the name Halcyon to Jonah, Check it, please, as a favor. Jonah's shoulders slumped, and he was a good agent, but he was a tired brother. Fine, I'll check it. In return, you need to know what you're stepping in. We've been tracking a pattern. Over the last 6 months, there have been 5 accidents involving Moretti's extended family, a cousin's brake line cut, an uncle's boat sinking. Nothing that points back to a rival. It all feels internal. Someone is cleaning house. A knife in the house. The phrase echoed in her mind as she left the diner. She needed another perspective, one outside the law. She went to Harbor Wave, a tiny independent podcast studio smelling of dust and old electronics, run by Noah Penn. He was the city's foremost chronicler of organized crime, a man who survived on coffee and skepticism. Dr. Hart, Noah said, pushing a pair of oversized headphones back. To what do I owe the pleasure come to correct my pronunciation of myocardial infarction? I need to know about a ghost, Elise said, cutting to the chase. A hitman. Last year, he wore a scar, right shoulder blade, shaped like a breaking wave. Noah went still. He spun in his chair, typing. The one who... Yes, I remember the file. He turned the monitor. A grainy security photo appeared. They call him Gull. Used to be freelance muscle, then got a full-time gig, high-level protection. For who? Elise felt her pulse quicken. That's the interesting part, Noah said. He wasn't Adrian's man. He was on Serafina Moretti's personal detail. Disappeared right after your husband's incident. Most assumed he was dead, a loose end tied up. A bodyguard for the woman now being poisoned. The pieces were clicking together in a terrifying mosaic. Serafina, Gull, the internal accidents. Elise left Harbor Wave and made one more stop. She had managed to secure one of Serafina's blister packs of medication. She took it to the Gull Wing, a small, independent toxicology lab run by a brilliant and discreet chemist. The call came 2 hours later. It's digitalis, doctor, the chemist said. Trace amounts, but it's there. Ground foxglove. Old school. Not enough to kill outright. Just enough to slowly weaken the heart muscle until it gives out. Whoever is doing this is patient. And very, very cruel. Elise hung up, the phone feeling cold in her hand. She was standing at a moral precipice. If she went to Jonah with this, the IB would tear the Moretti family apart, likely sparking the very war Adrian was trying to prevent. Adrian would fall. And given the picture in her pocket, she should want that. But an old woman was being murdered. A mother. And then there was Mina. What would happen to that little girl in the firestorm? Her conscience warred with her grief. She had to warn him, not the Don, the son. Meanwhile, in his own office overlooking the dark harbor, Adrian Moretti was following the money. The name Halcyon Wharf Trust had flagged his own internal audits. It was a new player, aggressive, and its money was flowing in a pattern he didn't like. The funds moved from Halcyon to a series of offshore accounts, all of them ultimately controlled by a single, shadowy law firm. The firm's senior partner was a man named Pierce Lorne, a lawyer known for making problems. And empires disappear. And the primary beneficiary of Halcyon's recent acquisitions, Rico Salvetti, it wasn't just an external threat, it was a coordinated attack. Elise sat in her car, the lab report on the passenger seat. She was piecing it together. The poisoner had to be someone with daily, intimate access to Serafina, someone who wouldn't be questioned, someone who was invisible, a knife in the house. Her mind flashed to an image from the periphery of her memory, at the hospital, when she'd first seen Adrian with his mother, a young woman, quiet, in a simple uniform, adjusting Serafina's pillow, Mina's new nanny, Alba. She pulled out the business card Adrian had given her, the one with the hotline for his daughter. Her hands were shaking. This was the line. She was crossing it. She dialed. The phone picked up on the second ring, but it wasn't Adrian's low rumble. It was a child's whisper. Hello. Mina. Elise's heart stopped. Honey, is your father there? I need to speak to him. It's Dr. Hart. There was a pause, a sound of small feet on a hardwood floor. Then the whisper came again, closer, more conspiratorial. "Daddy's not here. It's just me and Miss Alba, and we're gonna play a new game." "A new game? What game?" "Miss Alba says we're moving the kitchen," Mina whispered, a hint of confusion in her voice. "She said we're going to have a picnic. She's moving the kitchen down to the cellar." "Moving the kitchen?" The words, so innocent and bizarre from a child's lips, were a scream of warning. Elise Hart's foot slammed the accelerator, her small car hydroplaning on the flooded streets of Port Oriole. To the cellar. Gas. She didn't let her mind finish the thought. She drove straight through the security arm of the Briar Harbor estate, the wooden barrier splintering. She skidded to a stop on the gravel and was out of the car before the engine died. Adrian Moretti materialized from the shadows of the grand entryway, his face a mask of cold fury. The rain plastered his black shirt to his chest. "What did you do?" he snarled, intercepting her before she reached the steps. He gripped her arm, his fingers digging in like steel. "What did you tell your brother he hit my warehouse? You set me up." "Let go of me," Elise shouted, struggling against his grip. The accusation, the sheer male arrogance, blinded her for a second. "Mina, where is your daughter?" "Stay away from my family." He pulled her closer, his eyes ice. "She's in the cellar!" Elise screamed, shoving him with all her might. The move surprised him, breaking his grip. "Alba took her to the cellar, she called me." The raw panic in her voice finally cut through his rage, in the sudden silence between them, broken only by the storm. Another sound reached them. It was faint, carried on the damp air from a ventilation grate near the foundation. A child's thin sob. They moved as one. Adrian didn't bother with the internal stairs. He ran to the heavy bulkhead doors set into the patio, wrenched the padlock off its hasp, and descended into the darkness. Elise was right behind him. The wine cellar was vast, smelling of damp earth, old oak, and something else, something sharp and metallic. "Mina!" Adrian's voice was a roar. "Daddy!" The small voice came from the far end, behind a towering rack of priceless vintages. They rounded the corner. Mina was there, huddled against the stone, clutching her teddy bear. Her face was streaked with tears. Beside her, shockingly out of place, was a portable propane stove, the kind caterers used. The valve on the tank was wide open, hissing, flooding the enclosed space. Taped to the side of the canister was a ticking device, a simple kitchen timer wired to a battery and an electrical sparker. Another accident designed to look like a tragic mistake in a sealed room. Adrian didn't hesitate. He swept past the hissing tank, snatching Mina into his arms. He buried her face in his neck, turning his body to shield her from the device, and started backing away. "Elise, get out!" Elise didn't run. She was a doctor. She was trained for triage. Her hands, which had been shaking, were suddenly rock steady. She lunged forward, her fingers finding the valve and twisting it shut. The terrible hissing stopped. The timer's ticking suddenly seemed deafening in the silence. 3 minutes left. She saw the simple wiring. She didn't waste time trying to cut a wire. She ripped the entire battery pack free from the duct tape. Silence, absolute. Mina was sobbing. Great, shuddering gasps into her father's shoulder. "It was a game. Daddy, Miss Alba said it was a picnic. It smelled bad." Adrian held his daughter so tightly his knuckles were white. His shoulders were shaking. He looked over Mina's head at Elise, his mask of control utterly shattered. In its place was a raw, primal terror she recognized. It was the face of any parent who had almost lost everything. He, the man who controlled the port, had been helpless. "Elise," he said, and his voice was thick, broken. "Adrian, let me see her," she said, her voice dropping into its professional, calm cadence. He slowly lowered Mina to her feet, but didn't let go of her hand. Elise knelt, bringing herself down to the child's level. "Hi, Mina, I'm Elise. That was a very scary game, but it's over now. The air is safe. Let's play a breathing game. You and me. Can you copy me? Breathe in deep. 1, 2, 3. And now, let it all out like you're blowing out a big candle." She guided the little girl, hand on her diaphragm, until the panicked gasps slowed into rhythmic breaths. She was creating a new memory, a safe one, to overwrite the terror. Adrian watched her. He watched this woman, the widow of the man he was accused of killing, calmly and tenderly bring his daughter back from hysteria. She was a miracle, a paradox that had just walked into the center of his toxic world and saved its only clean part. "Thank you," he whispered. It was not a platitude. It sounded like a confession, a prayer, the first time he had admitted fear to another human being in decades. His security team, alerted by the breach, finally thundered down the stairs. "Boss." "Yet get this cellar swept," Adrian commanded, his voice returning but the tremor still there. "Prince, now!" He pointed to the valve Elise had touched. "But not her. Get the prince off the tank, the timer." One of his men, wearing gloves, examined the timer. "It's Gull's work." "Boss, I recognize the wiring. Simple, effective." "Gull," Adrian breathed. The ghost was real. "He's alive. He's with Rico." "Miss Alba was on the phone," Mina whispered, her hand clutching Elise's. "Before, she was talking in her secret language, the one that sounds like the sea." Elise met Adrian's gaze. "The Cableway Guild." "I have to move my mother," Adrian said, the strategist snapping back into place. The attack was two-pronged, his mother and his daughter. "Tonight, this house is compromised." He looked at Elise, his gaze desperate and direct. "I need you. Not as a doctor, as the only person in this city I know isn't on his payroll. There is a private clinic, Lantern Street. It's clean. Will you take her? Will you keep her safe?" Elise looked at the man before her. The father, the killer, the son. "Yes," she said. "I will save your mother. But you have to promise me something." He waited, his entire world balanced on her word. "You stop this. You stop the bloodshed. No retaliation, no war. You find another way. For her." She nodded toward Mina. Adrian looked at his daughter, now half asleep on her feet, and then back at Elise. He gave one slow, heavy nod, a promise made under duress, a promise he had no idea how to keep. Later, after Mina was safe in a new room, two of Adrian's most trusted men guarding the door, Adrian himself stood in the hallway. He just leaned against the wall, watching the door, looking utterly spent. The storm outside raged. He was a king who had just realized his castle was made of sand. Elise walked up to him. She didn't speak. She just reached out and placed her hand on his shoulder. He didn't flinch. He didn't move. He closed his eyes just for a second and let his body lean almost imperceptibly into the simple, grounding weight of her touch. It was the first act of uncomplicated kindness he'd felt in a decade. A single, warm spark in the middle of the deluge. Serafina was secure. The Lantern Street Clinic was a fortress, anonymous and quiet, its location now known to only 3 people. Elise included, the storm, as if exhausted, had broken, its fury softening to a persistent, weeping drizzle. Adrian had driven, not back to the compromised estate, but to the ruins of St. Marina's Chapel, a stone skeleton overlooking the churning sea. They stood under the dry arch of the collapsed bell tower, the air sharp with salt, wet ivy, and the clean smell of ozone. The adrenaline from the cellar had finally drained away, leaving them both exposed and raw. "She'll be safe there," Elise said, her voice quiet. She was watching the gray waves crash, not him. "For now," Adrian replied. He leaned his broad shoulder against the ancient stone, the weight of the last 24 hours pressing down on him. "My father, he enjoyed the chaos. He used fear as a tool. He made sure we all saw the blood." His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "When Mina was born, I held her. She was perfect. I swore to myself she would never see that part of the world, never know the man I have to be." His voice cracked. "Just once. Tonight, I brought that world right to her room." Elise turned to him then. The strategist, the Dawn, was gone. This was the man from the wine cellar, the father who had been shaking. "You didn't bring it," she said softly. "You trusted the wrong person, but you saved her. We saved her." She looked away, out at the sea. "I've been living with my own guilt for a year. My husband, Liam, he wanted to leave Port Oriole. He hated the corruption. I was the one who insisted we stay. My career was here. My brother, I was selfish." Her voice thickened. If I had just listened to him, he would be alive. He looked at her, truly seeing the shared geography of their grief. They were not the Don and the widow. They were two survivors, anchored by the violence of others. "You're blaming yourself for the wrong thing," Adrian said, his voice rough. "You're blaming yourself for living." He pushed off the wall, closing the small, charged space between them. He didn't touch her, not yet. He just stood before her, letting her see the profound exhaustion in his eyes. "You saved my daughter's life. You are risking yours for my mother. And tonight, you saved me." "I just stopped a gas leak," she whispered, her heart starting a slow, heavy drumbeat against her ribs. "No," he said, "you did more." He raised a hand, his calloused fingers hesitating before tracing the line of her jaw. His thumb brushed the dampness from her cheek. She didn't pull away. She leaned into the touch, a touch that was hesitant, rough, and impossibly gentle. Their foreheads met. They stood that way for a long moment, breathing the same salty air. His other hand found hers, lacing their fingers together. It wasn't a gesture of possession. It was a lifeline. He kissed her. It was slow, uncertain, tasting of rain and desperation. It was not a kiss of passion, but of profound, aching recognition. It was a question, an apology to their separate pasts, a hope for a future that seemed impossible. Elise felt the rigid control in him, the immense strength he held in check. Her free hand came up, resting on his chest, feeling the frantic, steady beat of his heart beneath the damp fabric. It matched her own. As he shifted, deepening the kiss just slightly, her hand moved, sliding up his shoulder, her fingers brushing the raised, rough skin through his shirt. The scar, her breath hitched, but she didn't pull away. His breathing deepened, matching the rhythm of the rain outside. His heavy wool coat, which he draped over a broken wooden pew, slid unheeded from the damp wood to the stone floor. The moment was suspended, fragile, a tiny warm spark in the cold, until the sharp, insistent buzz of his phone shattered it. It was the Mina line. He broke the contact, his eyes still holding hers, and answered. His voice instantly transformed. "Mina, are you okay? Kara, I'm safe." Elise watched as the father eclipsed the man. He listened, murmured assurances. "Yes, I promise. We will talk when it's safe. I love you." He hung up and looked at Elise, his expression torn. A small, sad smile touched his lips. She returned it, that shared smile. A silent promise to continue what the call had interrupted was almost more intimate than the kiss. "Elise," he said, his voice low, still holding her hand, "the scar." "I know," she whispered. "If you say stop," then he said, his gaze unwavering. "We stop, always, no matter what." She looked at the man who had just offered her absolute control, the one thing no one in his world ever gave away. She didn't pull her hand from his. She simply nodded. Across the cove, half a mile away, in a car parked on a scenic overlook, the shutter of a high-powered lens clicked. Jonah Vale lowered the camera, his face grim. He had them. Adrian Moretti, his primary target, embracing his sister. This was the leverage he needed to break her. This was how he would save her from the anchor. The next morning, the city woke up to Noah Penn's voice. His new podcast episode had dropped at dawn. The Harbor Angel, he called it. Who is the mysterious doctor seen at the Blue Lark, saving a rival Dawn, and who was seen leaving the Moretti estate in the early hours? Port Oriole's underworld has a new guardian, and she wears scrubs. The story was a match on dry tinder. By noon, Rico Salvetti's organization had fueled the fire, leaking doctored photos and rumors to the tabloids. Moretti's muse, one headline blared, Dr. Hart, grieving widow or mafia mistress. Elise's world imploded. Flamingo Hospital, bowing to pressure, placed her on immediate, indefinite leave. The final blow came at 3 o'clock, a formal summons from the Interstate Integrity Bureau. She met Jonah in his sterile office. "They think you're compromised," he said, his voice flat. He threw the photos from St. Marina's on the table. Elise looked at the images of her and Adrian, her heart aching. "What do you want? Jonah? I want you to turn on him, wear a wire, testify, end this." "No? Elise, he will destroy you." "No," she said, her voice like steel. "I will go. I will face the INUB. I will answer their questions, but I want a deal. A deal. I want federal protection. Not for me, for Mina Moretti." Jonah stared, incredulous. "You're protecting his daughter. She is an 8-year-old girl who was almost murdered last night. You want my cooperation? You protect that child. I want your best team. Full time." Jonah ran his hands through his hair. Trapped. "Fine, you'll get it. The Seagull unit. They're the best. They'll be invisible. But they'll be there." Elise stood. She walked to the door and paused. "And Jonah, he's not the anchor. The city is... We're all just trying to find a way to breathe." She left him and walked out into the hostile afternoon sun. Adrian's car was waiting 2 blocks away, as she knew it would be. She got in. He looked at her, his face etched with worry. "Elise, the news." "I know," she said. She reached across the console, her hand finding his. She laced their fingers together, a mirror of the night before. This time, there was no hesitation. It was a commitment. "They've summoned me," she said. His hand tightened on hers, the knuckles white. The net was closing, and they were both in it now, together. The digitalis began to clear from Serafina Moretti's system within hours of her arrival at the Lantern Street clinic. Elise had administered the antidote, her hands steady, working purely as a physician. When the old woman's eyes finally focused, they were sharp and lucid, showing none of the fog from the previous weeks. "He trusts you," Serafina whispered, her voice like dry paper. Elise, checking her vitals, merely nodded. When Adrian arrived, his mother gripped his hand with surprising strength. "There is an enemy who wears our family's face. Figlio mio," she rasped, the words tearing from her. "He was poisoning me, to make the old man's son weak." "Who?" Adrian's voice was low, dangerous. "I don't know his name, but I know his heart." She fumbled for a small key worn on a chain beneath her nightgown and pressed it into Adrian's palm. "My private safe. Find the anchor ledger. It holds them all. The real accounts." In a sterile high-rise apartment, a new safe house far from the harbor, they opened the book. It was not a simple ledger of numbers. It was a complex cryptogram of shipping manifests, chemical formulas, and dates. "This is a log," Elise said, her scientific mind seeing the pattern first. "These are transfer dates, matching the shipments of Serafina's medication. He was logging the poison." "And the payments," Adrian added, tracing a line of code. "The money is being washed through the Halcyon Wharf Trust, which in turn is the primary donor to the Amber Bay Restoration Fund." He pulled up the fund's public registration on his laptop. It was a clean, popular charity dedicated to rebuilding the coastline. Elise scanned the advisory board, a list of Port Oriole's most respected citizens. And then her blood froze. "Adrian," she pointed to the screen, "the fund's media consultant, the one who shaped their entire public image." It was Noah Penn, the friendly, skeptical podcast reporter, the man who had coined the name Harbor Angel. He hadn't just been reporting the story, he had been a paid consultant for the very organization poisoning Serafina. He was a two-faced player, and he had used Elise's grief to get close to the story. The masks were falling, one by one. While they worked, Adrian's most trusted man reported in Alba, the nanny, was not just hired muscle. She was Rico Salvetti's cousin, planted in the house months ago. The hitman, Gull, was merely her handler. But the true brain, the one pulling the strings of Rico, Alba, and Noah Penn, was the man who had revived the ancient Cableway Guild, the man whose name was on every document for Halcyon, Pierce Lorne, the shadow lawyer. The net was closing, but not just on Lorne. Jonah cornered Elise outside the clinic the next morning. His face was a mask of cold fury and betrayal. He had seen the photos from St. Marina's. The IEB knows Moretti has the real ledger. Anchor. We want it. Elise. It's not that simple. Jonah, there's a lawyer, Pierce Lorne. He's tied to this. I don't care about the branches. I want the root. Give me that book, or I am arresting you for aiding and abetting a known felon. This stops now. He was trying to break them apart, to save her. She returned to Adrian and told him the ultimatum, his kingdom for her freedom. He looked at the ledger, the key to his entire empire, and then at her. He didn't hesitate. He went to a high-speed copier. "Give your brother this," he said, handing her a perfect copy. "It's enough to start the seizures. It will satisfy his superiors. It will keep you safe." "And the original?" she asked. "The original," Adrian said, his voice soft, "is the insurance that keeps Mina safe. This is my choice. I trust you." It was a declaration more profound than any kiss. The copy was enough to ignite the firestorm. Jonah filed the report, and the IIB began seizing Halcyon assets. Noah Penn, suddenly exposed as a consultant for a now toxic fund, panicked. His name was everywhere. His call to Elise was frantic. "Elise, you have to help me. I didn't know about the poison. I swear. Lorne, he had leverage on my family. I was trapped. Please, meet me. I'll give you everything. I have proof on Gull, the real identity. I'll testify." "Where?" "The fog bridge. Half an hour. Please, Elise. He'll kill me." It was a trap. She knew it. He knew it. But he was also a man about to die. Adrian refused to let her go alone. They drove, pulling up just as the infamous harbor fog rolled in, swallowing the bridge in a cloud of gray. Noah was there, a ghost in the mist, clutching a data drive. "Elise!" he gasped, running toward her. "Thank God I—" A single, flat crack echoed through the fog. It was not a handgun. It was a high-velocity rifle. Noah was thrown backward, his eyes wide with surprise. He crashed against the steel girder, dead before he hit the pavement. "Sniper!" Adrian roared, grabbing Elise and tackling her behind a concrete divider just as a second shot sparked where she had been standing. Then, chaos. Figures emerged from the fog. Jonah, he and his Seagull unit had been tailing her. The protection for Mina now extended to Elise. Jonah ran to Noah's body, his gun drawn. He knelt, checking for a pulse that was obviously gone, and then he saw it, glinting on the wet asphalt next to Noah. A single brass shell casing. He picked it up. His blood ran cold. It was stamped with the insignia of his own unit, the Seagull unit. "No," he whispered. He ran to his own team's sniper, who was set up on the opposite end. "Did you fire?" "Negative. Sir, target was obscured. My weapon is cold." Jonah yanked the man's rifle. Checking the breech, it was the wrong model. It had been swapped. He looked around wildly. "Keene, where is Officer Keene?" His second-in-command, Miranda Keene, was gone, vanished. She was the rat. She was Pierce Lorne's agent inside the IB. Another shot pinged off the concrete, providing cover fire for her escape. Adrian pressed Elise flat against the ground, his body a shield over hers. "I will not lose you," he vowed, his voice a raw growl amidst the gunfire. "We are not being separated again." In the scramble, the anchor ledger had fallen from Adrian's coat. It lay open on the wet ground. Elise, pinned beneath him, saw it, the last page. It wasn't numbers. It was a simple, hand-drawn sketch of a ship's anchor. But the lines were not lines, the stock, the crown, the flukes. They were coordinates. "Adrian!" she gasped, pointing. "Look, it's not a drawing. It's a map, latitude and longitude." He glanced down, his mind processing instantly. 40.7, 74.0, the old shipping yard. He knew the location. Cold Storage 13. It wasn't just a ledger. It was the address for Pierce Lorne's central data hub, the heart of the snake. The truce was a cold, pragmatic thing, forged in the sterile silence of Jonah Vale's Dinu B-issued safe house. The fog bridge had changed everything. Jonah, stripped of his rogue agent and his institutional faith, was just a man. Adrian, his nemesis, was now his only asset, and Elise was the bridge between them. "Keen has me locked out of the system," Jonah said, pacing the small room. "She's flagged me as compromised. We're ghosts. This has to be off the books." "Cold Storage 13, Adrian said, studying a blueprint of the docks on a tablet. "It's Lorne's digital vault. He runs the guild's logistics and his legal blackmail from one server. Oh, it will be guarded by his own men. Private military. Not just dock thugs," Jonah countered. "We can't get past the gate." "You can't," Elise said, looking up from the blueprint. They both turned to her. "But I can. He'll expect force. Or an IEB raid. He won't expect a workplace accident. I'll make an emergency call. A worker with a severe crush injury. I'll walk right in the front door with my medical kit. You two just have to find the back." Before the operation began, there was one piece of his life Adrian had to secure. He didn't take Mina to the safe house. He took her to a room hidden behind a bookcase in his own private study at the estate, a room he had built himself. It was soundproof, with its own filtered air supply. He had covered the ceiling in hundreds of glow-in-the-dark decals. "This is the star room. Kara," he whispered, tucking her into the small bed. "No monsters can ever get in here. You'll stay here with your headphones and your movies, just for a few hours. The Seagull unit is right outside the main house. Yes, but this is safer." Mina touched his cheek. "Are you going to stop the monsters?" "Daddy." He kissed her forehead. "I'm going to try." The night was cold, the air thick with the smell of diesel and low tide. The heist began not with a bang, but with a call. Elise, using a burner phone, reported a forklift rollover at Cold Storage 13. She arrived moments later, calm and authoritative, her presence disarming the private guards. "I need access to the main floor. The caller said he was pinned near the primary generator." She said, "All business." As the guards scrambled to follow her, creating a focused vortex of chaos, two shadows detached themselves from the darkness near the perimeter fence. Adrian moved first, a blur of motion, disabling a pressure sensor with a bypass tool. Jonah was right behind him, patching into the camera feed with a portable disruptor. "Looping the feed for 30 seconds, Jonah murmured into his comm. "Go." They moved like a well-oiled machine. Adrian, the creature of shadows, neutralized two guards with silent, economical precision. Jonah, the technician, sliced through the digital locks leading to the sub-level. They found the server room. It was a freezing, humming vault. While Jonah jacked his hard drive into the main console, Adrian stood watch at the door. "I'm in," Jonah whispered, his fingers flying. "He calls it Tide. It's everything. A shadow ledger connecting Pierce Lorne to the Halcyon Trust, payments to Officer Keen, shipping manifests for the Cableway Guild, blackmail on Rico Salvetti. He's been playing them all." The door hissed open behind Adrian. It wasn't a guard. It was Gull. His eyes were dead, his face set in a grim mask. He had been waiting in the shadows, a loyal dog guarding his master's secrets. He didn't lunge at the men. He lunged at Elise, who had just joined them. Adrian moved without thinking. He threw himself in front of her, twisting to take the blow. Gull was fast, the knife a silver arc. It wasn't a stab. It was a deep, vicious slash. Adrian grunted, the sound forced from his lungs, as the blade ripped through his coat and deep into his side. Before Gull could strike again, Jonah tackled him, a raw cry of rage erupting from the agent. The two men crashed through the server room door, tumbling out onto the high, windswept gantry that overlooked the container yard. Adrian slumped against the server rack, his hand pressed to his side, blood already pouring through his fingers. "Arterial!" he gasped. Elise's terror vanished, replaced by a cold, clinical focus. She was the doctor. "Hold this," she commanded, grabbing his hand and forcing it harder against the wound. "Don't move." She ripped her medical bag open, pulling out supplies. "There's no time for sutures." She tore his shirt open, saw the gushing wound, and clamped a hemostat directly onto the bleeder. Adrian roared, his back arching off the wall, but the bleeding slowed to a dark ooze. Science had just saved action. Outside, the fight was brutal. Jonah versus Gull, a mirror match of two broken men, fighting on a narrow strip of steel 50 feet above the ground. Jonah, fueled by the betrayal of his bureau, fought with a desperate ferocity. He broke Gull's defense, a combination of blows ending with Gull hanging precariously over the edge, the dark sea churning below. "You killed Noah," Jonah snarled. Gull just smiled, blood in his teeth. "Do it, be like us." Jonah looked at his own shaking hands, then at the man who represented everything he hated. He hauled Gull back over the railing, slamming him onto the metal walkway. He didn't throw him. He pulled out a pair of zip ties and cinched the killer's hands behind his back. "No," Jonah panted. "You'll stand trial. The cycle ends." He returned to the server room to find Adrian pale but conscious, leaning heavily on Elise. Her hands were covered in his blood. She was shaking now, the adrenaline wearing off. Adrian, despite the agonizing pain, raised his good hand and touched her cheek. His thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "If we survive this night, Elise," he whispered, his voice rough, "I'm buying you a piano for your apartment." It was a promise of a future, a promise of a home. "Alarms," Jonah said, pulling the tide drive free. "We can't go out the way we came." Adrian nodded upward, toward the ceiling. "We won't." He pointed to the massive, dormant steel cables of the old Cableway Guild, their smuggling route. "We use their road." They clipped onto the emergency harness, the three of them gliding through the darkness, away from the storage facility, the wind whipping at them. They landed on the roof of a secure building a quarter-mile away. Jonah plugged the tide drive into a secure laptop and hit enter. "It's done. I'm uploading it directly to the IIB director, bypassing the state office. Keene is finished. Lorne is exposed." In his glass office, high above Port Oriole, Pierce Lorne watched his multiple screens blink red. The tide drive was active. The firewall was breached. He was exposed. He didn't panic. He simply closed the laptop. He picked up his secure phone and made a call. "He won," Pierce said, his voice calm. "Moretti has the data. It's over." He paused. "Which means it's time to clear the board. He took my network. I'll take his heart." He looked out the window at the distant lights of the Moretti estate. Burn it all to the ground. The strike on the Briar Harbor estate was not a siege. It was an eradication. Rico Salvetti's mercenaries, hired through Pierce Lorne's bottomless accounts, moved with tactical precision. They were not there to conquer. They were there to burn it all, with Mina Moretti inside. Leading them up the marble steps, a tactical radio clipped to her vest, was Alba. The nanny had traded her soft uniform for body armor. But Mina was not in her bedroom. She was deep inside the house, hidden behind the false bookcase in her father's study. In the star room, the sound of the assault was a dull, heavy thudding, like a giant's footsteps. She had her headphones on, but she could feel the vibrations through the floor. She smelled the first faint wisp of smoke. The little girl pulled her knees to her chest, the glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling her only light. Her breathing started to come fast, turning into tiny, panicked gasps. Then she remembered Elise's voice from the cellar. "Count your breath. Hear your heart. Safety is right here." Mina closed her eyes, placing a small hand on her own chest, and began to count. Inhale. 1, 2, 3. Exhale. 1, 2, 3. In the speeding car, Adrian was fading. The makeshift clamp Elise had fixed in his side was failing, the blood soaking through his shirt, a dark, spreading stain. "You're going into shock," Elise said, her voice flat, clinical. "Pull over." "I'm not stopping." His voice was a rasp, his hands white on the steering wheel. "Pull over or you'll die before you reach her." The car screeched to a halt 3 blocks from the estate, the glowing orange of the fires now visible over the trees. Jonah, in the car behind them, blocked the road. Out of the car! Adrian, now! Elise ripped a first aid kit from Jonah's trunk. Adrian slumped against the side of the vehicle. "This is going to hurt," she said. Not unkindly. She ripped his belt from his pants and cinched it high around his thigh, creating a desperate tourniquet to slow the bleeding in his torso. He cried out. A sharp, choked sound. "Jonah," she said, not looking up from her work, "get your team." Jonah was already on his comm. "Seagull unit is green. We are loyal to the IUB director, not keen. We are moving in on a hostile paramilitary force. Rules of engagement are in effect. Go." The estate was a war zone. Jonah and the Seagull unit moved in through the flanks, their disciplined fire cutting through the disorganized mercenaries. Adrian, leaning on Elise, his body fueled by pure, desperate adrenaline, went straight for the house. They found Alba in the main hall, just outside the study. The hallway was a gallery of antique mirrors. Alba raised her weapon, her face a mask of cold resolve. "She's mine. Moretti. Payment for my family's debt." "Flashlight," Elise whispered to Adrian. "In my bag." "Elise, get back." "Give it to me." The mirror, at the end of the hall. Elise stepped out, not into the line of fire, but to the side. She clicked on her heavy medical flashlight, aiming the high-intensity beam not at Alba, but at the beveled mirror behind her. The effect was instantaneous. The beam hit the mirror and refracted into a blinding web of light, turning the dark hallway into a disorienting trap. Alba cried out, raising a hand to shield her eyes, firing blind. Adrian moved. He wasn't the strategist now. He was the predator. He crossed the distance in 2 strides. The sound was not a gunshot, but the sickening, solid crack of bone. He disarmed her, shattering her wrist, then slammed her against the wall, knocking her unconscious. He held her there, his breath tearing from his lungs, his entire body vibrating with the urge to kill. "Adrian," Elise said, her hand on his arm. He looked at the unconscious woman, then at Elise, then at the study door. He let Alba slump to the ground. "For Mina." He breathed. Jonah appeared, zip-cuffing the former nanny. "She'll talk." Then, a secondary blast. The kitchen erupted in flames, a fireball rolling down the corridor. The mercenaries had set incendiaries. "Mina!" Adrian roared, ignoring the fire, and threw his shoulder against the study door. The room was thick with smoke. The staroom door was locked. He smashed it open. Mina was huddled inside, coughing. "Daddy!" "Go," Elise said, pushing past him into the tiny room. "I have her. Clear the way." She scooped the child into her arms. Mina began to wail, terrified by the smoke and the flames licking the hallway. "Shh, shh, Mina, I've got you," Elise murmured, holding the child tight against her chest as they moved. Listen to me." She began to tap a steady rhythm on the child's back, a simple 1-2 beat, thump, 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 thump. "That's my heart. Can you hear it? That's the heart song. You just match me." Mina buried her face in Elise's neck, her small, coughing sobs slowly quieting as she clung to the steady, living rhythm. Adrian saw the fire spreading toward the main gas line in the utility room. A mansion-leveling explosion was moments away. While Elise and Mina headed for the exit, he rerouted, kicking open the utility door. He grabbed a wrench from a toolkit, ignoring the searing heat, and with a desperate roar, broke the main pipe, venting the gas harmlessly into the burning air. Jonah and his team had neutralized the remaining mercenaries. He was crouched over the last one. Pulling Alba's secured radio from his vest, Pierce Lorne's cold voice was still coming through. "Status report. Is the girl confirmed status?" Jonah shut it off, securing the device. They burst out of the smoke-filled house into the night air, collapsing in the rose garden. The rain was washing the soot from the air. Sirens wailed in the distance. Adrian, his makeshift tourniquet failing, sank to his knees. Mina slid from Elise's arms and crept toward him. She was safe. She was alive. She looked at her father, covered in blood and soot, and gently placed her small, clean hand on his rough cheek. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice clear in the sudden quiet, "don't be a bad man anymore." The words struck Adrian Moretti with more force than the knife. He closed his eyes, leaning into her tiny hand, and pulled her into a desperate hug, his body shaking. "I'm trying, Kara," he whispered into her hair. "I'm trying so hard." Elise watched them, her own heart aching, the smoke, the blood, the fear. It all faded. She wasn't looking at a mafia boss. She was looking at a father, broken and bleeding, holding his entire world. She saw the man he was, and the man he was desperately trying to become, and she knew, with a terrifying certainty, that she loved him. The moment of peace lasted only a second. Adrian's secure phone, the one he used for business, began to vibrate on his belt. The sound was obscene in the quiet garden. He looked at Elise, his eyes filled with a new dread. He pulled Mina closer with one arm and answered the call with the other. "You took my network," Pierce Lorne's voice said, calm and cold. "So now I'll take your leverage. A final negotiation. Longfin Warehouse. Midnight, come alone. Adrian or every medical board and news station in the country gets a very detailed, very authenticated file on Dr. Hart's little hobby of altering hospital records to save street trash. Your choice." The Longfin Warehouse was a cathedral of cold shadows, the air tasting of rust and the deep, stagnant brine of the harbor. A single, brutal halogen lamp hummed overhead, illuminating a small circle of concrete where Pierce Lorne sat at a metal table, looking relaxed, as if waiting for a business lunch. Adrian stood opposite him. He had refused to sit. His face was a grayish white, his breathing shallow, the makeshift pressure bandage at his side already soaked through. Elise stood a pace behind him, a silent, steady presence, in the steel rafters above, hidden in the darkness. Jonah Vale had his microcamera trained, the feed streaming live to the IUB director's secure terminal. "The board is set," Pierce said, his voice echoing slightly in the vast space. "The tide drive, Adrian, the original, an assigned public declaration that you are ceding all control of the Moretti holdings at the port. In exchange." He tapped the screen of his laptop. "I will withhold this rather fascinating file on Dr. Hart's humanitarian indiscretions." Adrian's hands clenched. He was trying to calculate, to find an angle, but the blood loss was dulling his edges. "The tide drive for the file on the doctor. Nothing else. The port stays mine." "A counter offer," Pierce mused, almost smiling. "Denied. You see, you're negotiating from a position of weakness. You're wounded, and you're in love. You'll give me the port to save her reputation." "The file has nothing to do with him," Adrian growled, taking a painful step forward. "This is between you and me. I'll take the fall, all of it, the smuggling, the money. I'll give you a confession that buries me, but you leave her and my family out of this." "No." Elise's voice cut through the cold air. She stepped forward, moving to stand beside Adrian, her gaze level with Pierce's. "He's wrong. I did it." Adrian looked at her, his expression a mask of disbelief and terror. "Elise, don't—" "I altered the records," she said, her voice clear and strong, resonating with a sudden, absolute authority. "I falsified charts to get life-saving treatments for patients who were undocumented or uninsured. I stand by that. I will make a public statement. I will surrender my license. I will face the consequences of my choices." She leaned forward. "But I will do so only in exchange for binding federal witness protection for Serafina Moretti and full, permanent immunity for Mina. You will not touch them. That is the only deal on the table." Pierce Lorne stared at her, his amusement turning to genuine curiosity. He finally let out a short, dry laugh. "Remarkable. You'd throw away your entire life for his family. He'd throw away his empire for you." He shook his head, the smile vanishing, replaced by a cold contempt. "This is what I will never understand about you people. This sentiment, this belief that love is a shield. It's not. It's a vulnerability. It's the weakness that makes you lose." "He's stalling," Adrian whispered to Elise, sensing the shift. "And now, Rico," Pierce called out into the darkness. "We're ready!" From the main loading bay, Rico Salvetti emerged, flanked by his men. They fanned out, their weapons trained on Adrian. "This ends tonight, Moretti," Rico snarled, his confidence high. "He's all yours, Rico," Pierce said with a dismissive wave. "Take him. And the doctor. She's a loose end." Rico's aim faltered. He looked from Adrian, bleeding but defiant, to Elise, who stood her ground, unblinking. "What no? The deal was for the port. The deal was for Moretti. You said nothing about killing a civilian, a doctor." Pierce sighed, the sound of a man burdened by the incompetence of others. "You really are just a street thug, aren't you? You lack vision." Before Rico could react, Pierce pulled a pistol from under the table and fired. The shot was deafening. Rico looked down, confused, at the blooming red circle on his own chest. He fell to his knees, his gun clattering to the floor. That was the only opening Adrian needed, ignoring the fire in his side. He exploded into motion. With a guttural roar, he lunged across the table, his one good arm outstretched, and seized Pierce by the throat. The table overturned, and they crashed to the concrete. The warehouse erupted. Rico's men, enraged and leaderless, opened fire. Jonah, from his perch, returned fire, the clean crack of his service weapon distinct from the mercenaries' automatic bursts. The Seagull unit, hearing the shots, began their breach. Elise didn't run. She ran to Adrian, who was wrestling with Pierce, the lawyer younger and fitter than he looked. "Adrian," she yelled. He was losing strength. She put her hand flat on his back, feeling the frantic, hammering rhythm of his heart. It was too fast. "Jonah!" she screamed into the small calm in her ear. "He's fading. We need to end this, the plan Bay 4. Push him to Bay 4. Pierce, hearing her, shoved Adrian off and scrambled to his feet. He made a run for it, but not toward the exit where Jonah's team was entering. He ran deeper into the warehouse, toward loading Bay 4. He thought it was his escape route. It was the trap Jonah's team had set. Pierce stopped at the bay door, pulling a small remote detonator from his pocket. "You fools!" he screamed, his voice high and thin, the calm facade shattered. "You walked right into it. I rigged this whole section." He slammed his thumb down on the button. A dull click, nothing. He smashed the button again. A bead of sweat trickled down his temple. He looked up. Jonah was standing on the gantry above him, holding a small, severed block of C4. "We swept the bay an hour ago. Pierce." Jonah called down. "Your rogue agent was very helpful with the codes." The mask of control completely disintegrated. Pierce's face contorted in pure, primal panic. He clawed at his ankle, pulling a small backup pistol from its holster. He didn't aim at Jonah. He didn't aim at the approaching Seagull team. He leveled the gun straight at Elise. "No!" Adrian yelled. He found his feet, his body screaming in protest, and threw himself forward, planting himself directly between the gun and Elise. He stood there, unarmed, swaying, his side a solid mass of agony. He couldn't fight anymore. He could only shield. He locked eyes with Elise, his gaze a final, desperate apology. A figure in black tactical gear slammed into Pierce from the side, tackling him to the ground. The gun skittered away. Jonah, Pierce was pinned, screaming curses, defeated. It was over. Adrian swayed, the adrenaline finally gone, leaving a cold, empty void. He started to collapse. Elise rushed to catch him, but before she could reach him, a final shadow detached itself from the darkness behind him. One last henchman, loyal only to Pierce, who had stayed hidden, waiting. A cold metal circle pressed hard against the base of Adrian Moretti's skull. "Don't move, boss." The narrative returns, full circle, to the moment the steel first touched his skin. The night was late. The storm had passed. They were in a temporary safe apartment, high above the city, far from the blood and fire of the estate and the warehouse. Adrian Moretti, his side crudely stitched by Elise and burning with agony, had insisted on one thing, putting his daughter to bed himself. He pulled the cashmere blanket up to Mina's chin. The 8-year-old was exhausted, sleeping deeply, the glow-in-the-dark stars of her new room casting a faint, peaceful light. He watched her, his one clean thing. Click! The sound was absolute, a metallic click, just behind his ear, the sound of a gun being cocked. He saw the reflection in the dark window, his own, Mina's bed, and a shadow behind him. "I escaped," Alba whispered, her voice raw. She had slipped Jonah's custody during the warehouse chaos. "Now call the doctor. Tell her to come say goodbye." Elise arrived 20 minutes later, her face pale but set. Jonah was already outside, his seagull unit moving into a silent perimeter, but Alba was too desperate, too unpredictable. Elise entered the apartment, her hands raised. "She's in the bedroom," Alba's voice called out, strained and high. Elise walked slowly down the hall. She saw the scene: Mina, asleep, oblivious. Adrian standing beside the bed, his face gray with blood loss but his back rigid, a shield, and Alba, her eyes wide, frantic, the gun pressed hard against Adrian's head. "You should have let them kill me," Alba whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Alba," Elise said, her voice dropping, not into a doctor's cadence, but something softer. "I know what Pierce did. I know he threatened your mother. He promised he'd ruin her. He'd take her home." Alba was shaking, her finger tightening on the trigger. "You don't know what it's like to have everything you love held over your head." "I do," Elise said, taking one slow step. Adrian tensed, but Elise's eyes were locked on Alba's. "I know what it is to lose the person you love most. I know that trigger pull. I know the sound it makes. And I know it doesn't fix anything. It just makes another hole in the world. It just makes another child wake up without a father." Elise nodded toward the bed. "Don't do that to her, Alba. Don't make her like us." The tension was a razor's edge. This was the moment. Elise took another step, her hands still raised, and then, in a move of impossible bravery, she reached out. Her hand didn't go for the gun to disarm. It went to the gun. She laid her palm gently over the cold steel barrel, her skin on Alba's, on the weapon. Her eyes never left Alba's. It was a silent waltz of absolute trust. Adrian didn't move. He didn't lunge for the gun. He stood perfectly still, his body a fortress for his daughter, his life completely in Elise's hands. He watched her face, breathing in time with her, a shared rhythm of sheer, terrifying faith. It was not a physical embrace, but it was the most intimate act of his life. Alba let out a choked sob. The gun trembled. He bankrupted my family. My mother, she's sick." "We know," Elise said, her voice a low murmur, her hand still steady on the weapon. "Jonah Vale is outside. We have a program, the Green Harbor Witness Protection. We can get your mother out. We can get her medical care. Pierce is done. You don't have to be." "Let it end here, Alba," Adrian said, his voice rough. "End it, so our children don't have to live this nightmare." The tension broke. Alba's shoulders slumped. The gun wavered, slowly, agonizingly. She lowered the weapon. In that exact second, the apartment door crashed open. Pierce Lorne. He had tracked Alba's emergency locator. He stood in the hallway, his face a mask of fury, and fired twice through the bedroom door. "Down!" Adrian roared. He grabbed Elise, pulling her to the floor in a tangle of limbs, covering her body with his own as bullets shredded the wall where they had been standing. Mina screamed, waking to the nightmare. Before Pierce could fire a third time, the hallway lit up with muzzle flashes. Jonah and the Seagull unit were on him, a tide of tactical gear. The threat was over. Elise, pinned beneath Adrian, felt his dead weight. Adrian, he was unresponsive. She scrambled out from under him. The bullets had missed, but the impact had torn his stitches. He was bleeding, unconscious. She pressed her cheek to his, feeling his faint breath. "I'm here," she whispered, a vow against the chaos. "I'm here." The purge was swift. The tide drive, combined with the testimony of a broken Alba, gave the newly cleaned-up IUB everything it needed. Pierce Lorne and the remnants of the Halcyon Trust were indicted, the Cableway Guild, its leadership decapitated, dissolved back into myth. Serafina recovered, her sharp eyes returning. The first thing she did was sit in the rose garden, holding Mina, telling her stories of the old country. Adrian Moretti survived. He woke in a hospital, with Elise asleep in the chair beside him, her hand gripping his. His recovery marked a sea change. He publicly stepped down, in an unprecedented move. He dissolved the Moretti business and signed control of the port's shipping lanes over to the new Oriole Harbor Community Council. His remaining funds were diverted into an educational trust, rebuilding the city's crumbling schools. Months later, the city celebrated the festival of the Lighthouse Night. The air was warm, filled with music and the smell of roasted chestnuts. On a stage near the water, Elise sat at a grand piano, the one he had bought her. Her fingers moved over the keys, playing a song of quiet, complex beauty, a song called Homecoming. Adrian stood in the crowd, watching her. Mina, now 9, was asleep on his shoulder, her breathing soft, her face peaceful. When the song finished, the crowd erupted, but Elise only looked at him. He walked over, shifting Mina's weight. "It was beautiful," he said. "It was for you," she replied. He leaned in, and they shared a light kiss, simple, unhurried, and real. It held no desperation, only the quiet promise of ordinary days. Jonah Vale watched from a distance, a small smile on his face. He had already filed the paperwork that cleared Elise's name, citing her invaluable undercover assistance. The new Harbor Wave podcast, run by Noah's former interns, was airing a new episode, The Ones Who Chose Love Over Fear. Later that night, Adrian stood by the window, looking at the harbor. He pulled out the silver pocket watch. He ran his thumb over the Latin inscription, Poenitentia Fidele, and snapped the cover shut. The ticking stopped. "Daddy," Mina's voice came from the doorway. She was rubbing her eyes. "Are we safe now? Is the house peaceful?" Adrian turned. Elise was standing just behind Mina, her hand on her daughter's shoulder. He looked at them, his wife and his child, his anchors. He smiled, the expression finally reaching his eyes. "Yes, sweetheart," he said, "it's peaceful, because our love is stronger than this harbor. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to connect with you, so please comment below and let us know where in the world you are listening from. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to Mafia Boss Story, give this video a like, and support us by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.